This Sunday is Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, and that's not in the Narrative Lectionary, but Reverend Thorne at the Riverside Church, it is definitely going to be an aspect of worship. So I have two questions for you. Why should churches look at Martin Luther King Sunday as a part of their worshiping life, and how are we doing that at Riverside?
It's such a good question. I think for churches, particularly churches that struggle with how they do justice and how they live out the social gospel in the 21st century, I think Dr. King is an amazing model for us. He was a Baptist minister. You know, he preached every Sunday. He was had a master's in divinity. So he was thinking about the things that I think we're thinking about with the same theological lens that pastors are. So I think when we're wringing our hands and asking questions, well, what about asylum seekers? And what about the political divide in this country? And what about the hungry? And all of these groups that are marginalized and struggling. You know, we can look at politicians and we can look at friends and neighbors, but here we have a real gift in Dr. King and his life and his ministry and his writings, which are stunning. You know, listen to more than just the I Have a Dream speech, and listen to the I Have a Dream speech to the end, because the part that gets cut off is the part that is really good, that talks about the insufficient funds and the check that bounces. A really great theological model, a really great ordained minister model for how we love our neighbors as ourselves. I think that's why churches need to pay attention and not sleep on Dr. King.
I also want to raise, I think I saw the people posting just the other day that he was born the same year as Barbara Walters, who just passed away, which often frames things a little differently. You know, we should have had him with us longer, and he could have been with us longer. Uh, when he was assassinated, he still had so many more years that he could have had in him, and I'm grateful for all the words and work that he was able to give to the world. But it often leaves me wondering, oh, what else was there? Which is
Yes.
partly what I think is the call for churches to lean into days like this, because we continue to embody the what else might there have been, and we are the echo of that legacy, continuing to see how it can continue to materialize in our lives and our world.
That is absolutely true. I mean, we had Dr. King with us, you can see over my shoulder, for as long as we did. And now, of course, we have our children. And so, what then is the legacy? Because I think what is beautiful, despite the fact that King was assassinated, what is beautiful about his legacy is how it continues generation after generation to continue to roll forward. And that question, what now? Or where do we go from here? Continues to be answered by generations of folk who still are inspired by his words, and how grateful and blessed are we that he was as prolific as he was in his short life. So I read a letter from a Birmingham jail every year for inspiration. And so to take that collection of things, and he's very biblically connected. If you listen to his speeches and his sermons, he will give you a sermon right tied to biblical scripture, and is very clear about Amos. You know, is very clear about the Good Samaritan, and that's a gift for the church and for the generations that come. I think you asked me a second part to a question that I did not answer. And of course, I can remember that, but have no idea what the question was.
Someone else to rewind the video to remember what it was too, because I'm just enamored with this right now too. I do want to hear from you. Uh, the sense that today King is beloved. Everyone, seems to be like, oh, he's a saint. I have a dream. What a great speech. And that's all a lot of people can ever quote. But during his day, he was not always quite so well thought of by everyone in the country or the world. How do we hold that tension, or how do we even remind people of that reality as we might look at a sanitized version of King or what he's become through pop culture, and how do we hold that tension in reality, and what does that lead us to do in our world?
Right. Well, I think we have to remember then and now, King was leading a group of people for whom trauma was a part of their life. I mean, racialized oppression, white supremacy in this country traumatized and continues to traumatize African Americans. And so for him to step out of the place where he lived, to step out of the place where he led, and to come and say, this is what we should do, or this is what is needed in the country, people were frightened, and he was not spoken to well. He was not spoken of well. I would say the majority of folk found him terrifying because he was pushing against a system that, had he not been successful, had very dire consequences for people, losing jobs, having houses firebombed, having family members killed. And then, of course, Dr. King himself was assassinated. I mean, we were living in a time when people thought it not a big deal to bomb a church and kill 4 little girls. So this is what we were up against. And then you've got Dr. King, who's, some might say, not my pastor. I don't go to his church. He's not leading my community, coming in here, as my grandmother would say, causing a ruckus, right? Stirring things up, and making life hard for people once he goes back to wherever he came from. He's educated, he's connected. And so I think those people then and now can be frightening for marginalized communities who've had to carry the weight and the repercussions of what someone like a Dr. King kind of leaves in their wake.
Now, you are in a unique position to be the senior minister at a church where Dr. King preached a half dozen times, including the Beyond Vietnam speech, which was delivered 1 year to the date prior to his assassination. Some even say that speech was a bit of a turning point in his focus, which might have been part of the inciting incident to that assassination. What's it like for you? You're 90-some days on the job here at Riverside. What's it like for you stepping into a space where, his footsteps still echo and his words still ring?
Well, it certainly does turn my attention to the text that says we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. I mean, it doesn't get more tangible than that, to plant your feet, to proclaim, thus saith the Lord, in the same place that King planted his feet and placed his hands. And while I'm sure the microphone has changed over the years, to have looked out at the congregation and to have had the same vantage point that he had, I think I and others, draw tremendous strength and inspiration just being in that space. But what I also think I understand about Dr. King is that he did not want to be lifted up. I think the fact that we even have a King Sunday might not sit so well with him. When he says, I want to be remembered as a drum major for justice and all of those other, he said, shallow things shall not matter. I mean, this man won the Nobel Peace Prize. He was lauded and revered by so many people. But I think wanted to be understood as one of many who helped to move this work along, which if we understand our spiritual ancestors in the faith, that's our story too. We stand in line from the apostles through to the next generation. And I think Dr. King wanted to be one in the number, and not perhaps the ones that we are shining a spotlight on, and in a way revering beyond the God that we revere. So I think that he might be a little uncomfortable with this, but I think that's what I take from it as I stand in that place, that I get to do this thing similar to Dr. King. I get to have 20 minutes on a Sunday to say something that might be helpful, but I also have to understand myself as a person, a follower of Jesus Christ, who's standing in this line of followers doing my piece for this moment.
Well, this coming Sunday, for anyone watching this in real time as it's published the week in advance of MLK weekend, you will not be standing in that pulpit to preach. We have a guest preacher, and then we have a teach-in happening after worship. Can you say a bit about who's going to be preaching this Sunday at Riverside and what those of us can expect in this MLK Sunday?
I can. We have the great honor and pleasure of welcoming Dr. Stacy Floyd Thomas, who is a womanist ethicist who currently teaches at Vanderbilt Divinity School in Nashville, Tennessee. Dr. Floyd Thomas is really good friends with my sister, and I have had the good fortune of getting to know her better through my sister. We reached out to Dr. Floyd Thomas, and she within seconds said, I would be delighted to come. If you've not heard Stacey Floyd Thomas preach, she is a stellar sermonic artist. I think that we will get both educated and inspired for the movement. She will come and I believe talk about the ethics of social justice in the 21st century. So what does it mean to do justice in a world that includes Trumpism? What does it mean to do it in a world of COVID? And what does it mean to do justice in the 21st century when we have asylum seekers, when we're gearing up for this 2024 presidential election? And so we hope you'll come and listen to Dr. Floyd Thomas. Following worship, we have a Teach In, Act Up forum on faith and justice. And our partners at the Children's Defense Fund, New York, will be joining us to talk about that similar thing from their point of view. So we are at Riverside centering children because we do believe they are the future, but we also understand they are the right now present. So what is Dr. King and his legacy calling us to do in this space? So we hope you'll come and be with us after worship for that as well. And I hear our caterers will also be serving up a soul food lunch. Come in and get in however you feel. Maybe it's the food that brings you in. Maybe it's the preaching. Maybe it's the after worship conversation. Whatever it takes, come in. There will be something tasty for you, and we would love to share it with you.
Beautiful. So if you're in the New York area, if you can get on a train, a plane, an automobile, this is a good weekend to make your way to Riverside. But if you can't, don't worry. You can join us online. The Sunday morning worship will be online. The teach-in will be online. All these things will be available to participate and view and experience online as well. trcnyc.org will have all the information and the things to click so you can participate in that. It's going to be great. Reverend Thorne, I am excited. Your first King Sunday at Riverside, and I think it's shaping up to be a fantastic one.
It's going to be epic. It's going to be epic. And we just look forward to welcoming everyone, however you come, in the virtual space or in person. We're going to learn. We're going to get inspired to go out and do the work of justice and love that God calls us to.
So other pastors, faith leaders, if you're watching this, these might be some great ideas or ways to think about King Sunday for your context. But we'd also love to hear what you're doing for King Sunday in your space. Leave a comment below. Let us know how you as your congregation or you individually kind of lean into and really make this a rich weekend. And hopefully not just a weekend. This is just one of those reminders that we need to be thinking and following this drum major and being a part of this band all year long.